Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Tom Dreesen. Tom, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be on the show, Michael. You and I, but your family and I go back a long way, you know.
Exactly.
Through television, but it's so good to be on your show. By the way, where
Well,
I'm from, Boswell is like Smith, you know.
well, I'll tell you, the show being Music Night, a lot of people, may watch it in, say, a comedian on a music night, but you've had such ties to music throughout your career. And then, from my perspective, music and comedy are a lot alike, in as much as you've got to have timing, structure, and the truth.
Mm. Yeah, I agree, and there are similarities that, Frank Sinatra made it look like a conversation, and with his lyrics, and I do the same thing in stand-up comedy. It's a conversation, not a presentation, and I was fortunate that when I started out in show business, you had to work clean. It was just there was only ABC, NBC, CBS. There wasn't cable television, so wherever you went in America, in the early '70s, somebody say, "What do you do for a living?" You say, "I'm a stand-up comedian." The next question out of their mouth was, "Oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson?" So we all had to, figure out a way. How can we get on that show? So if you watch that show, you saw that the comedians were doing material that could make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. So you had to write clean material. So when I started doing Tonight shows, singers were always looking for comedians that could open for them that wouldn't offend their audience. So I started touring with Sammy Davis Jr. for 3 years. I toured with Smokey Robinson, with Gladys Knight and the Pips, with Natalie Cole, with Mac Davis, with Tony Orlando and Dawn, with Frankie Avalon, with James Darren, with Bobby Rydell. I'm leaving out people. Tony Bennett, Michael Bublé. I toured with all these singers because they knew that I wouldn't offend their audience. I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show, and God knows, on hundreds of television shows. So that's the kind of stand-up they wanted. So that's how I got associated with music. And never once in all those years that I toured those singers did I do my show and go out in the lounge or in the casino. I sat in the wings and watched those singers because I was fascinated by their approach to their show. Plus, I was a fan of almost all of them before I ever was in show business. So it was just fun being there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, reading your book, Still Standing, uh, it's a very engaging read. And, knowing of you, I thought I knew, your career fairly well, until I read the book and realized that there was so much beyond what I was aware of. But there was three things in there where I found, commonalities between you and I. We were both originally from Harvey.
Hmm.
We both attended Bryant Elementary,
Mm.
albeit at different times. And then, both of us, very briefly, in our early working years, were shoe salesmen.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I was at Tom McCann. Where were you?
I was at Kitty's Shoes,
Oh
but
wow.
only for a matter of days,
Yeah.
because the store manager one day informed me that there's no room for sarcasm at Kitty's Shoes. Then he then proceeded to let me know that, uh, your sarcasm will prevent you from becoming a manager at Kitty's Shoes. Do you understand? And I let him know that he made it abundantly clear that one must be completely devoid of humor to become a manager.
Well, there you go. But the other thing we have in common is your father and I were friends because your father and I graduated from Bryant School together.
Yep.
And may I say that, and this isn't, I said this my whole life if his name ever came up. He was a wonderful guy. He was a gentleman. He was a good student, a quiet guy. Or maybe it's because I talk so much that he never got a word in
Don't worry, I've made up for him.
Great.
So, but before, in the book, you chronicle all the things that you went through prior to getting into comedy.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you would consider it foreshadowing or irony, But you talk about how you were shining shoes in the saloons when you were very young. You would hear Frank Sinatra records on the jukeboxes, and then later you end up touring with him and becoming his friend all those years. Which that is an amazing jump.
Yeah, I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral too. I do a one-man show now called "The Man Who Made Sinatra Laugh." I just did it in Frankfort, Illinois. Wonderful theater there, CD and me, and sold it out. It was just wonderful to go back in that area again. But it's basically it's a story. It's my story, as the book is, of a little boy, trudging through the snow with his shoe shine box from bar to bar where I grew up at, and shining shoes to help make money to help feed my brothers and sisters. And Frank was in all the jukeboxes then, and the story is about a 10-year-old boy that here's Frank Sinatra on the jukebox while he's shining shoes in Harvey, Illinois. And one day that boy is carrying Frank Sinatra's coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So I take them on the journey, as you know, through the book and through my one-man show. I take them on that journey of how I got there and all the trials and tribulations, all the times I got knocked down, kept getting back up again, which is why the book is still called Still Standing. It's a double entendre. I'm a stand-up comedian now for 51 years, and I've been knocked down a lot in my life, but I kept getting back up again.
And that's the key.
Yes, it is. That is it.
Yeah. Now, in the book, to jump forward, you discuss Tim and Tom. How did you guys come to work together?
I would never have been in show business. I never dreamed of show business. I never thought I'd be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. I joined a civic group called the JCs back in Harvey, Illinois, the Harvey JCs. They were worked on community projects. They taught you leadership. They had leadership training programs, how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, how to serve on, form subcommittees, Robert's Rules of Order, how to speak in front of an audience, but basically attacking the problems of that community. And in doing so, it helped you be a leader, but it also helped the community become a better place to live. And JCs were nationwide. One of the biggest problems we had in those days were our young kids using drugs, as it is today. So I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor. I figured make them laugh, tell them some jokes, something, get them laughing, play some music, have some records, and then once you got their attention, plant the seeds of the ills of drug abuse in that particular community. And helping me on the project, I'm going to digress just for a moment. Prior to that, I was wandering aimlessly, Michael. I'd be in a bar at 2:00 in the morning with my buddies. I had a wife and 3 kids, and I'd say, I don't belong here, but where do I belong? And I literally was praying, God, this can't be what I'm supposed to be doing. Please show me the way. What am I supposed to be doing? Because I was so unfulfilled going from job to job. And at this time, when I proposed the drug education program to the JCs that night to have them sanction it, a young black guy, Tim Reed, joined the chapter. He graduated from Norfolk State College, and E.I. DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep. And he came up to me and said, I'd like to work with you on that project that you're talking about. Now, as fate would have it, I said, gee, I'm sorry. I've already got a guy, a white friend of mine named John DeBoer. I said, but thank you. He said, okay. And the next day, John DeBoer called me and said, I can't do that with you. I've got a new job. I said, gee, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reed. We go into classrooms. We rehearsed it all, go into classrooms, and the program became #1 in 50 states and in 22 foreign countries through JC publications on how to teach drug education at an 8th grade level. They weren't teaching drug education in those days at a college or a high school level, let alone at 8th graders. And one day, walking out of a classroom in Harvey, Illinois, a little 8th grade girl walked by Tim and I, and she said, you guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we started writing material what we thought was funny. And next thing you know, there were no comedy clubs in those days. So we worked all black clubs in the North and the South, and all white clubs too as well. But black clubs called the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And the rest is history. We stayed together 6 years. Tim went on to become Venus Flytrap on WKRP Cincinnati. He was on a show called Simon and Simon. He was on another show called Sister Sister. He played the father. And we stayed together 6 years, and we both went our separate ways, but still the best of friends. I love him like a brother. Everything I own, everything I have, I wouldn't have had I not met Tim Reed, and the same way he feels about me. And his children call me Uncle Tom. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. How did you wind up doing the episode of WKRP with him?
Well, the guy, Hugh Wilson, who wrote that show, he wrote a part about a white guy who was working at an all-black magazine, and he was the only white guy there. And this guy had to go interview Venus Flytrap, who was a black guy at an all-white station. So Hugh wrote that, and they thought, what better guy to play it would be me, and so they cast me in that role, And Tim and I, it was great because we hadn't worked together for a few years by that time, and so just to be united with him again, we had a lot of fun in that scene that we did. A couple scenes we did together.
Yeah. Now, did the chemistry pick up right where you left off?
Yeah, it's when I get around him, I make Tim laugh. I can make him laugh in a heartbeat. I recall things, and he makes me laugh. But we recall things, and I could call him right now, and he'd be laughing within 2 minutes, reminiscing over some of the things we did. Yeah, he's a great guy. Again, I love him like a brother. Something very interesting, and I don't know if you're going to keep this in the show, but in 1969, when Tim Reed and I got together, the world was in turmoil. There were race riots all over America and all the major cities in America, including Harvey, Illinois, which had one of the largest riots in the country. There was students were protesting the Vietnam War. America was in turmoil. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. We were 5 years removed from the Civil Rights Act in 1969. All across America, people saying, we need more discourse among the races. We need better race relations. And Tim Reed and I were the only discourse at that time. We were going on live stages, not on TV, not in movies like Richard Pryor or Gene Wilder or Bill Cosby and Bob Cope on TV. We were going out into the trenches. We did 11 prisons in 1 year. Wherever there was racial tension, that's where we went. High schools, colleges, and making people laugh. We weren't preaching. We were just making people laugh, but we were having a discourse. People saw us on stage having race relations. In order to have race relations, you have to have race relations. And so Tim and I were having race relations, and we were poking fun at every stereotype out there. And I'll close with this. I can't tell you of the times that a young white kid would come up to me after the show and say, I got a black friend that I'd like to reach out to. But if I do, the white guys are going to call me names. But watching you and Tim, I'm going to reach out to my black friend. Then a black kid would come up and say to Tim, I got a white friend that I'd like to reach out to. But if I do, the brothers are going to wear me out. But after watching you and Tom, I'm going to reach out to my white friend. That means more to me and Tim to this day than any award you could possibly bestow upon us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, after you guys went separate ways, you headed west. And, it took a lot of effort, a lot of hard work to finally get that breakthrough. What were those years like?
I had a wife and 3 kids, and my wife thought I was coming out here. She wanted me out of show business. My ex-wife, what was her name again? Oh yeah, Plaintiff. Anyhow, but I don't blame her. She didn't marry a comedian. She married a guy that was, just came out of the service and was a working stiff. And she wanted, her father brought a check home every day for 40 years, every Friday. I mean, so she wanted that kind of security. And to go into a precarious business like show business, you already get paid. And I had the bug, and I knew I wanted to make it in comedy. So I came out here. She thought I was coming out just for a couple of weeks and coming back and going to get a job in the factory and forget this crazy dream of being a comedian. And I ended up, I thought I could get on the Comedy Store right away, because that's where you had to be when you came out here in 1975. The Comedy Store. Stand-up comedy was the rock and roll of the 70s. At the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard, it was the only game in town. There was no improvisation or laugh factory out here in those days. It was the only game. And every night someone was getting discovered. Johnny Carson had moved out here in 1972. So in 75, that show was going strong. Freddie Prinze made one appearance on The Tonight Show and got a sitcom the next day. So we all had to get to The Tonight Show. I ended up broke. My wife wrote me a Dear John at that time. We did get back together, but she got a hold of me and said, it's over. She wrote a letter to a place where I was staying. She said, it's over. It's your dream. It's not mine. I'm never moving to California. I wish you the best. Now I'm down on my luck. Next thing you know, I'm broke. I'm sleeping in an old Nash Rambler. It wasn't my car. It was up on blocks. The front seat came down, so I used it as a bed. I really was on my rear end. I was praying every night. I hitchhiked up and down Sunset Boulevard, begging to work for free at the Comedy Store. And I finally got on. One night I auditioned for Mitzi, the owner of the Comedy Store, and she liked me, and so I got a regular spot. And then I kept working there, building up my material. I took some gigs back home and went back to Chicago, talked to my wife and kids into coming back out here with me. And then we've got a little old apartment, and I'm struggling, drawing unemployment. And one night, the Tonight Show gave me an audition, and I scored. I was auditioning with a new kid named Billy Crystal. I don't know whatever happened to him, but I'm on your show right now, Mike. So eat your heart out, Billy. Anyhow, so and that first Tonight Show, it changed my life. I did that one appearance. I got bumped 3 times before I finally got on, and I finally got on one night, and it was a hot audience, and I got like 8 applause. When I finished my last joke, I went back through the curtain, and Johnny called me back out for another bow. I took a bow, and he gave me that little circle, like that, and I never stopped working from that day. As I said earlier, I did 61 appearances on the Tonight Show, but the next day, CBS signed me to a development deal. I got a check for $10,000 in those days and $1,850 a month for a year. My rent was paid. My groceries were paid. My rent was only $225 a month at that time. My kids had shoes. I mean, my whole life changed. Sammy Davis Jr. took me on the road for 3 years. I was doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train. I'm the only white comedian ever to do Soul Train. I was doing the Hollywood Squares and $20,000 Pyramid. I was, I was working so much that one day I was on a plane heading east. I looked out the window and I saw myself on a plane going west. I said, I think I'm working too hard.
Tell me this, Tom. Do you remember the first bit that you wrote when you looked at it, you realized that you had something?
No, the audience lets you know. I remember, what happened to me, and I've told this many times to young comedians because it happens to them. I didn't know what I wanted to do in life, but the first night Tim Reed and I went on the stage, it was something I had written got a laugh. And it was like like a B movie where the dark clouds open up and the sun bursts through. And my whole being went, oh, yeah. Oh, this is what I want to do. I want to be a stand-up comedian. The thought that you could make a living making people laugh overwhelmed me. Overwhelmed. It was a Friday night. The next night, I went to church. It was in the book. I'm sure you read it, but I went to Ascension Church in Harvey, where I had been an altar boy, where I grew up at. And there was no one. It was a Saturday morning. There was no one in church. There was no service, and I prayed. I said, God, now I know what I want. I found it, God. If you let me make my living as a stand-up comedian, I'll never ask for anything else. I'll do charities. I was making all these promises, and that was, and 50 years from that date, that was September 1969. 50 years later, I went back to Harvey, Illinois, and I gave a sermon on September of 2019. I gave a sermon on the power of prayer, and I told the congregation right over there in that spot. I knelt and asked for everything everything that I asked for, I received. From the Bible, ask and you shall receive. I sound like a religious nut, but I'm not. I'm just I believe in a higher power, and it's certainly helped me my whole life.
Well, what you asked for, combined with your hard work, it came true.
Yes, it did. Well, the simple thing I said to the congregation, I said, how many of you out there were ever thinking of someone that you haven't seen in a long time, and the phone rings, and it's that person, you say, you won't believe this, I was just thinking about you. And they say, well, it's funny, I was thinking about you. Or you haven't seen somebody in years, you're thinking about them, you turn a corner and you run into them. And you say to them, I was thinking about you. And they say, just the other day I was thinking about you. Well, and they all raised their hand in the congregation. They all raised their hand. If human beings can transfer thought, and obviously we can, well, then how much can a supreme being transfer thought? That's my simple, logical answer to prayer. In the Bible, it says, ask and you shall receive. And that's what it is. It's that transferring of thought. If we can do that, that a supreme being can. So that's how powerful prayer is.
Well, you mentioned that, when you were praying, you said that you would give back, charity, what have you, and you've done exactly that. Because I know you work with a number of organizations.
Yeah, when I was growing up in Harvey, we lived in a shack. We lived back behind Ingles and Shepherd's on 143rd Mass, and way back, we had a shack. We had no bathtub, no shower, no hot water. There was 8 of us kids, and my mom and dad. And my dad was a heavy drinker, and so we didn't have a lot of things. We had no bathtub, no shower, like I said, no hot water. A rat-infested, roach-infested shack sometimes. Every Thanksgiving and every Christmas, the civic groups would bring baskets of fruit and ham and turkey and all these things. The civic groups, the Moose, the Quanta, the Elks, the JCs, bringing baskets of fruit to our shack. And my proud Irish mother at one time turned them away. She said, "No, my husband has a job. We don't deserve that." Us kids were trying to get around the door to get to that basket. But she was right about something. She taught me that she was right. He had a job and he should have been taking care of us. And the other thing, it wasn't the government bringing food to us. It was people helping people from the neighborhood. That's what made me join the JCs later on, because I wanted to do that. And that's what got me in the charity things, because I never forgot how much that meant to us. So, and then my 4 years in the military, whenever somebody had come and play a harmonica, we were just thrilled. So if I could go make people laugh. And then my sister Darlene had multiple sclerosis. My sister Darlene got it later in her 20s, and she was she was 18 months older than me, but I adored her. She was so good to me, like a second mother, and yet she was only 18 months older than me. She ends up getting MS. So I ended up running 26 miles every year for multiple sclerosis. We called it 26 miles for Darlene. And people would pledge money for every mile I run. And we'd raise money for multiple sclerosis in her name. And I bring celebrities in with me. Tony Danza, Frankie Avalon, Frankie Valli, Eddie Marinero, Jim McMahon, all the Bears, Tim Reitman, and Tom Thayer, and gosh, I'm leaving out celebrities year in and year out that would come there, and Tim Reed, and Smokey Robinson was the only one who ran all 26 miles with me. All the other celebrities run a mile or 2 or 4 miles, but Smokey ran all 26 miles.
That says a lot about Smokey.
Yeah, my mother always said, a good friend is someone you ask to go a mile, and they go 2 miles. How good a friend did I have? I asked him to go a mile, and he went 26 miles. We're the best of friends to this day. We stay in touch with whenever we play golf together, and I love him like a brother too.
Yeah, that's quite a testament that he would do that.
Well, if you know Smokey, anybody who knows Smokey, he loves everybody. And there's one thing he loves more than anything in the world, and that's to sing for you. He loves to sing for you, and he's so good at it. Such a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things I mentioned, seeing you on WKRP, I remember it wasn't too long after your first Tonight Show appearance, you were on a show, Carl Reiner's Good Heavens show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one of your first acting roles, wasn't it?
He gave me a break. I was really down then, and one night I was working at the Comedy Store, and I did my set like everybody else, and I went outside and stood out in the parking lot out in front where all of us comics hung out, and a guy taps me on the shoulder. He said, "My wife really loved your set. She thought you were so funny." And I turned around, and it's Carl Reiner.
Wow.
Oh my God, Carl Reiner! Yeah, I said, "Oh, Mr. Reiner. Oh, thank you so much." Oh no, I said, "My wife really thinks you're funny, and I wish you the best." I said, "Thank you so much." Now later, I'm out there with the guys, and the woman comes out and introduces herself to me. She said, "I'm Estelle Reiner. I'm Carl Reiner's wife." I said, "Oh, Mrs. Reiner, it's so nice to meet you." She said, "I think you're so funny," and blah blah blah. And she said, "Are you married?" I said, "Well, my wife and kids are in Chicago. I'm trying to get established out here, and so I'm struggling." So she said, she calls him, "Carl, come here." She said, "Help this boy." He said, "Honey, I told him how funny he was." She said, "That's not helping him. Help him." And he says, "Here's my card. Come to my office." I went to his office the next day. He said, "I got a small role in a series I'm doing, and it's called Good Heavens." He said, and it would pay me $500. Are you kidding me? In those days, I was $1 a day. I was going to Kentucky Colonel every night, eating corn and butt for under $1. And I said, oh, and so he put me in there. And then I said, "Mr. Reiner, could I ask you a favor? They normally pay you like in 10 days. I said, "Is there any way I could get money the next day?" He said, "That bad?" I said, "That bad, sir." He said, "You got it." And he took care of me. And I used that money to go back to Chicago. I went to Canada to do a TV show. And then from there, I went to Chicago and I opened from Pat's Domino at Mr. Kelly's and made enough money to convince my wife and kids to come back back to LA with me.
Yeah. Now, how did you wind up opening up for musicians?
What, you mean for musicians? For singers?
Yes.
Well, I mean, again, as I explained earlier, they were always looking for a comedian that wouldn't offend their audience. So they saw me on all the TV shows. Again, all those shows I was doing, all those TV shows. But Sammy Davis had a show called Sammy and Company, and I appeared on it. And he cracked up. I was doing routines about growing up in Harvey, playing basketball on an all-black basketball team. And I was doing routines about that. Now he was cracking up. And I was talking about, you know, playing football with all the black kids and all that stuff. And Sammy just loved it. And he said to me on the air, I'm taking you on the road with me. So Sammy's took me on the road for 3 years into Caesar's Palace, where I'd never worked Las Vegas that time. He put my name on the marquee. He made sure I had building on the marquee. And all those years I toured with him. And then all of a sudden, other singers were asking for me, again, as I pointed out, all the other ones, Smokey Robinson and Gladys Knight and the Pips and Natalie Cole and, Mac Davis and Tony Orlando and Don. I'm, leaving people out. But and then for Sinatra, I'm working with Smokey Robinson at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, and Frank was appearing next door at Harrah's. And I had seen Frank perform a couple times, and he created more excitement walking out to a microphone than most people do with their whole act. So I had, again, how fate would have it, I had 7 days that I was working with Smokey. I could have went over and seen Frank's show on any one of those nights. I don't know what made me do it. It was like a Wednesday night. I said, I think I'll go over there tonight. I called Harris because I had worked there many times before, and I told the maitre d' I'd like to come over. He said, oh, don't worry about it, Tommy. Just come on in. I'll take care of you. And I said, okay, thanks. So I finished my show. I didn't even change out of my stage clothes, and I ran out of Caesars at Lake Tahoe, and Harris is 2 doors over. So I ran over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. I loved to watch him walk out, and the crowd would go crazy. So I was running into the showroom, and the vice president of Harris Hotel saw me, a man named Holmes Hendrickson. He said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss that opening. He was talking to a big heavyset guy with a cigar. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Root. Well, I recognize the name. That was Frank Sinatra's lawyer. He said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen, and I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that a million times. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said, oh, I like this kid. He started laughing. And a week later, they booked me with Frank Sinatra at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. And I thought, great, I'll try to get my picture taken with him. I'll hang it at every bar back in Harvey, Illinois. And the second night, he and his wife took me out to dinner after our second performance. And in the middle of dinner, I can remember like it was yesterday, he set his knife and his fork down. He said to me, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years and 45, 50 cities a year. I stayed in his home 6 times a year, a great friendship. I stayed up with him till dawn, night after night, on the road or off the road. He never went to bed till the sun came up. At first, he was like the boss of the tour. Later, he was a buddy. We hung out. And toward the end of his life, he was like a father to me. I miss him every day of my life.
I'm sure you do. You've got some great stories, in the book that folks, once again, they pick up Still Standing, that they can read in there. Now, tell you to digress for a moment, Tom, you mentioned about, being on the road with Sammy. What went through your mind the first time you looked up at the marquee and saw Sammy Davis Jr. and Tom Dreesen on the same bill?
Well, it was so real. We were coming down the strip. The plane landed. We were coming down the strip in the limousine, and there my name was on the marquee. I'd always wanted to work Las Vegas, like most comedians, but now my name is on the marquee with Sammy Davis Jr. In those days, a lot of big acts didn't even put the opening act on the marquee. They'd put their names up there so big. I used to say Tom Jones and Diana Ross, they put their name up so big, there wasn't room for you to park your car in the parking lot. But Sammy insisted they put my name up there. It was so surreal. I was just so excited. He was such a kind guy and such a brilliant performer, and to be on the same bill with him, the same stage with him, it was a dream come true.
Yeah. Now, what were any of the shows that you did? Are there any with Sammy that stick out in your mind?
Well, I mean, there's so many shows that I did with Sammy, but I sat in the wings night after night watching him perform when I finished my show. What Sammy did though, when we went there, see, when you first go to Las Vegas, all the critics are in that room. And if you get a great review from the majority of the critics, you're going to come back. They're going to ask you back. And Sammy knew that. So he told that when we were at the rehearsal, the conductor of the entertainment director, I'm sorry, a guy named Nat Brandywine, he said to me, Tom, you're going to go on, we do a 90-minute show. You'll do 20 minutes. Sammy does an hour and 10. And he said, and Sammy said, no, hold on, Nat. This is Tommy's first time here. He's got a score. They served dinner in those days. That opening show, there was dinner. I mean, comedians died a horrible death. First of all, Caesars is one of the toughest rooms in Las Vegas to work because it has a high seating. Comedians like a low seating. Laughter is sound. It hits the ceiling and comes up at you. So my favorite, I was under contract at like 8 different hotels there. My favorites were the Sands Hotel, the Desert Inn, the Riviera, the Golden Nugget downtown. They had low seatings. They were intimate rooms. Caesars had a high seating and they served food. Waiters and waitresses clanging and banging, and it's just impossible to score. So Sammy knew that. So he told Nat Brandywine, he said, Nat, this is Tommy's first time here. All the critics are going to be there. I want him to score. I'll come out. And he said, I'll do 20 minutes. I'll do 4 or 5 songs. Then I'll bring Tommy out. Tommy, you do whatever time you want to do. And you feel you really got him good. And, then I'll come out and I'll finish the rest of the show. And that's what he did. Every night, he would walk out on that stage. And the waiters and waitresses, they're supposed to have that room cleared when the headliner comes out. So they'd see Sammy. They were taking food away from people who hadn't even started eating yet. And Sammy, he would get when he finished 4 or 5 songs, that audience was in the palm of his hand, room silent. Then he would bring me out. He'd say to the audience, he said, you've stuck with me through the good times and bad. I think of my audience as family. And if someone does something good for you, you want to do something for them, like bring them a gift. I got a gift for you. I saw this kid, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd bring me out, and I would come out and say, gee, I always dreamed that I'd work Las Vegas. And I always dreamed it would be Caesar's Palace, but I never dreamed that Sammy Davis Jr. would be my opening act. Sammy would laugh in the wings, and it was fun.
Wow. Now you mentioned some of the other folks, the other singers that you were on the road with. Any of those times stand out to you? Any shows or?
If you're going to play a song of Sammy Davis Jr., then I would recommend you play "I Gotta Be Me," and I'll tell you the story that's in my book. That before I ever met Sammy, Tim Reed and I were a comedy team in Chicago, and we were at the Black Expo. That was 1 week of Black businessmen and women around the world. They would come and have 1 week of a convention, and to enhance their businesses, and it culminated with a big show. And every Black artist in the business would come and do 2 or 3 songs. Comedians do 5 or 10 minutes, and so mostly all singers. So it was all the Motown acts and everything. So Tim Reed and I were in the wings. I was the only white guy there, and that if ever they needed to strike the stage for the next singer, they'd send a comedian up to do 5 or 10 minutes. And Tim and I waited for hours before we got our chance to go on. But just before we were to go on, there was a big murmur backstage. In came Sammy Davis Jr. with his entourage. And everybody's murmuring, Sammy Davis is here, Sammy Davis. 4 months prior to this, he had been at the White House, and President Nixon gave him an award, and he hugged President Nixon. Well, Sammy hugged stop signs. He hugged everybody. If he met you one time, Michael, he's going to hug you the next time he saw you. Just what he did was a hugger. But that picture, when he hugged Nixon, it went on the cover of Jet magazine, the cover of Ebony, and Sammy became persona non grata in the Black community. So, because they were very anti-Nixon. So now this is the first time Sammy's appearing in front of an all-Black audience since that picture. And he flew 3,500 miles from overseas or somewhere to come to do this show. The MC goes out and said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, please, Sammy Davis Jr. And like 15,000 people began to boo and jeer. Boo, get off the stage, boo, calling him names and boo. And he tried to get into the countdown. His conductor, George Rhodes, was on stage. Sammy started trying to get George Rhodes into the countdown so the music would drown out the boos. And George had headphones on, couldn't hear him, and it was deafening. And finally, Sammy stood there and he would not leave that stage, and they kept booing and cheering. And finally, the MC came out. We all had knots in our stomach and the wings. The great Sammy Davis Jr. being booed, and especially by his people, it was painful. The MC came out and said, ladies and gentlemen, the man came 3,500 miles to sing for you. Isn't what we're fighting for is that a person can be a Democrat, a Republican, a Catholic, a Protestant, a Jew? Isn't that what we're fighting for that individual freedom? The man came this far to sing for you. Doesn't he at least deserve to be heard? mumble grumble. Everybody sat down. Sammy went over and changed the sheet music, and he sang one song, and he got a standing ovation. He sang "I Gotta Be Me," and never before did those lyrics mean like they meant that night. He walked that stage, whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong, whether I find a place in this world or never belong. I gotta be me. I'll go it alone if that's how it must be. I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. Now, halfway through the song, we were going, "Oh my God, you see what he's doing? He's getting that crowd back." And we were amazed in the wing. And at the end of that song, they gave him a standing ovation. Like, "We still may not believe your politics, but that was special, pal." You know, most entertainers, Dean would have went, "Adios," you know what I mean? Frank said, "I'm out of here." Sammy was a street guy. He said, "Okay, you showed me what you got. Now let me show you what I got." In my 51 years in show business, I've seen people take a tough crowd and get them back. I've seen them take an off night and through the whole, maybe after 15 songs, get them back. I've never seen anybody take a hostile audience and in one song get a standing ovation. To this day, that's the greatest single performance I've ever seen.
Wow. It's a, as you said, it's in the book. It's a great story.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, Tom, before we get into the other stuff, before I forget, we had a bunch of questions from folks. So we'll get to that one. We'll start with Mike, who wants to know, what advice would you give a young entertainer who's struggling with his or her career?
Well, Bertram Russell said there are people in show business who become major stars simply because they didn't have sense enough to quit when they should have. And that's my advice. Bulldog tenacity. Don't give up. Study the masters. Whatever stage you want to be on, comedy, music, whatever it is, watch those who are on the stage that you want to be on. If you were going to become a brain surgeon, you wouldn't just study brain surgery. You'd go watch the brain surgeon operate. Watch the artist operate. Those that you would like to be like. We all start out emulating another entertainer. Singers and comedians, usually they're doing an impression of another singer because they like that singer. But eventually, a little bit of you comes out each night until you evolve and you become you on that stage. There's never been anybody like you on this planet ever before. Never. We're like the snowflake. There's no two snowflakes alike. There's no two human beings alike. So you are a unique, original human being. And never think of yours. And what I'm saying is, and so Candid Camera had a great line one time, "Caught in the act of being yourself." That's what you want to be out there. Be yourself. As a singer, if you're a singer, do like Frank Sinatra, immerse yourself in that lyric. He became, and he would become that lonely guy in a bar whose woman left him and he's never going to find love again. And you felt that. If you gave Frank Sinatra a song, it became a script to him. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? That's why he won the Academy Award and never took an acting lesson. Charlton Heston said to give Frank Sinatra a song is like, to watch Frank Sinatra sing a song is like watching a 4-minute movie. The joy of a song or the sadness of a song. Like Billie Holiday, what Frank once said, what he loved about her, she lived inside the song. I mean, these are things you learn if you're a new entertainer, to study the masters. I give motivation talks. So if you get me on a platform here, I'll never leave. But I talk on 4 subjects. I give motivation talks to corporate America, to high schools, to colleges, and to comedians, by the way. I give the motivation talk to them called "The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy" and how to get there. But I talk on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. So again, if you want to be in this business, don't let anybody take that dream away from you. Everybody came down on me. I mean, their family and friends sometimes said, "Look, are you crazy? Get a real job. What are you doing in that business?" But in that precarious business, show business. But it was my dream, and I wasn't going to let anybody step on my dream.
I'll tell you what, Tom, you mentioned people are influenced by others. Who were the comedians that you really looked up to?
Well, to be honest, I feel like Will Rogers, but I never saw a comedian I didn't like. I loved comedians before I ever was one. I never thought I was going to be one. But I mean, I listened to comedians on the radio. We lived in this shack. We didn't even have a TV. We didn't have a TV when I was growing up. We had, I don't know, beat up radio, but I would listen to Bob Hope, to Jack Benny, to George Burns. I'd listen to these comedians, But two comedians influenced me in different ways: Richard Pryor and Jack Benny. Now, Richard Pryor, when Richard Pryor came from Peoria, Illinois, well, I came from Harvey. And I grew up in a predominantly black area, and I had a lot of black friends. When Richard Pryor was doing his comedy, it was like standing on a street corner, like with all the guys back home. He spoke to my soul. But the reason I like Jack Benny, I think a person is an artist in any endeavor when they make their work look, one word, effortless. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, I can do that. No, you can't. He just made it look like you could. Jack Benny made comedy look easy, and it's not. He made it look easy. So I emulated those two at first, and then eventually became my own style, But that's
Yeah.
a couple of what I looked up to.
I remember, seeing an interview with Dean where he was saying that the key was when he realized if he could, no matter how hard he was working, if he could make it look like it was easy and natural, that he could win the audience over.
No, and he exemplified like effortless. Walk out there every night. Welcome to my world. Won't you come on in? I used to love to watch him in Vegas. He'd come out. He'd like they say, ladies and gentlemen, direct from the bar, Dean Martin. And Dean would saunter out to the microphone, and his piano player would be playing it. Dean would sing. He'd be like singing like, "Welcome to my world. Won't you come on in?" He'd look at the piano player and he'd say, "How long have I been out here?" I used to play golf with Dean. He was a funny guy, wonderful guy. I did the Dean Martin roast, and I met him in a bar. Where else are you going to meet Dean Martin? There was an old bar called Dominic's across the street from Cedars-Sinai Hospital. When I met him here in LA, and we just became instant friends. His children are good friends of mine now. I just had dinner with his son Craig and his daughter Gail, and I introduced his daughter Gail to a guy named Mike Downey, who was from Chicago Heights. And Mike Downey was a writer, later went to the Chicago Tribune. He used to write for the Star Tribune out in Chicago Heights, but then he later became a writer for Chicago Tribune and then with the LA Times. And I introduced Dean Martin's daughter to Mike, and they got married 8 months later.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell you what, we got another a question here. Sally wants to know, what was your most memorable appearance on The Tonight Show?
Well, without a doubt, that first appearance, I cannot tell you the pressure, the enormous pressure, and everybody knew one appearance, as I said earlier, one appearance on that Tonight Show and your life is going to change. And you're behind that curtain and you're waiting, and 26.5 million people watch that show. If you bomb that night, first of all the talent coordinators across the land watch that show. The Vegas buyers watch that show. Managers, agents, watch that show. If you bomb that night, there's no going back. And not only that, my mother had everybody back in Harvey, Illinois, watching the show. So if I bomb, I couldn't even go back home. So
Exactly.
the is enormous. And I stood behind there. And today there's a song, Whitney Houston sang it, but another girl named Dana Winner sings it so beautiful, that one moment in time. And the lyrics are, that when you're standing behind that curtain, you're singing, if I could just have that one moment in time. She sings, or I can be all that I'm here to be. That when all of my dreams are a heartbeat away and the answers are all up to me. That's what it is, standing behind that curtain. And when I went out and I scored that night, when I started getting laughs and bigger, and pretty soon, I got like 8 applause. When I scored that night, when I went through, I would have to say that has to be the most memorable. And again, I've never stopped working from that night. So that was my most. I did, like I say, so many of them, but that was my most memorable.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the Comedy Store before. What was it like being there at that time? Because when you were there, those first few years, so many people who went on to have incredible careers were there with you.
Yeah, well, I was on stage every night, some nights with all these unknown comedians: David Letterman, Jay Leno, Gallagher, Michael Keaton, Elaine Boozler. The girl waiting tables was Deborah Winger. Robin Williams. These were the comics there, all trying. And I was the first to get on the Tonight Show before the other guys. So I had a couple of of things going, a little bit earlier, but it was a joy to be around watching those new young guns, and they were good. They were really good, and look, like I say, look what happened to all of them. We're still the best of friends. David Letterman and I talk, once a week. We go out to dinner when he comes out to LA, or if I go to New York. And Jay, of course, is, right now polishing one of his 375 cars, or right, motorcycles,
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous of that collection of his.
Yeah, unbelievable, unbelievable.
Yeah. And tell me this, Tom, once you had that first, big, or I should say the point where you doing really well, did you splurge on anything?
I don't recall doing anything like that because I still had a wife and 3 kids. But what I knew I was doing good when I went into a store one day. I was in a hurry. I had to get a shirt, something, and I saw something I really liked, and I went and I went down, put my credit card down, and never said how much does it cost, because that was always so important. I never bought anything in my life that I didn't first look at the price tag. If I looked at a shirt that I loved, the first thing I looked at was the price tag. But I remember seeing this shirt I liked, and it was in an expensive shop, and I went to the counter and laid it down, and that's when I said, "Boy, I'm doing good." I didn't even care how much that cost because I wanted it. Uh,
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
yeah, yeah, it really
Yeah.
is. And then also the other thing too, my mom and dad never had a bank account. They never wrote a check ever. We lived from payday to payday, and most of the time there were no paydays. So I never had any experience with that. And then all of a sudden, I never made 6 years with Tim Reed. We didn't make enough money to survive. He had a wife and 2 kids. I had a wife and 3 kids. When I went alone single, and finally a year later, money started coming in. A friend of mine said, "How you doing, Tom?" I said, "I think I'm doing good, because my manager wants to talk to me about tax shelters, and I don't know what he's talking about." You know?
Again, a good feeling a good problem to have.
Yeah, it's you know, I know money is important, but at a certain time in your life, when you look back, like I'm at that age now, I look back, money's important to give you that security that you don't have to be out there every 5 minutes trying to get the rent money. That's a good part about it. But in the end, all you have are memories. So make some good ones. And I thank God every day I made some great memories with some great people, and went to some great places that I never thought I'd go to, and some great, wonderful lessons I learned along the way.
Yeah. What were some of the points where, 'cause I know there had to be more than one, where you kind of just stopped what you were doing, looked around and said, "I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe this is, what's happening."
I have so many of those moments. I have so many of those pinch me moments. Being in Vegas, seeing your name on the marquee, going back to Chicago and appearing at the Chicago Theater with Frank Sinatra, my name on the marquee with Frank Sinatra at the Chicago Theater. That I used to take my shoe shine box on the IC down to Randolph Street, and I'd walk over to the Chicago Theater and try to shine shoes while people were waiting to go into the theater, or at intermission, because you got bigger tips down there. And I saw all these names on the marquee, and here I was. Those are pinch me moments. Um, the Tonight Show, pinch me moments. Oh, flying in Frank Sinatra's jet, and never forget one time we were flying. There was a map in the private jet, that showed you where you are all the time. And I remember one time we were flying over Harvey, and he had a phone there. And I said, we were flying over Chicago, and it showed we were at, and I told Frank, that's right. He knew I lived in Harvey because I mentioned it so much. But I said, could I call my buddy? I had a friend named Don Bry. And he said, sure. And I called my buddy. I said, guess where I'm at? I'm on a plane. I'm sitting across from Frank Sinatra, because he used to sit in the bars and listen to Frank. Those are moments like that, that I could share with friends. Ellis Island, receiving the Ellis Island Medal of Honor Award. That's when my family came to this country. My grandparents and they came to this country on Ellis Island, and I received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor Award uh, for humanitarian service to your country. Those are pinch me moments. Again, I talk about it in my book. By the way, you can get the book on Amazon. They'll have it at your house in 2 days. They're really great at that, but that's a cheap plug I just gave you there. The book opens with me. I was with Frank a couple years. I was eventually with him 14 years, but after being with him about 2 years, taking all that for granted, touring with Frank, we leave Riverfront Arena and we're flying to Chicago. We came off stage that night. Frank said, "Let's go, Tommy." We jumped in the limo, squad cars and limousines, rushing us to the private jet. Moments later, we're flying over the venue. People aren't even in their cars yet. We're on our way to Chicago. And on the way there, we're going to the Chicago Theater, and they had just spent $8 million renovating it to its original structure and look. And Frank was excited about that. He said, "We're going to Chicago Theater." He said, "We're going to knock him dead, Tommy." And he sacked me on the jaw. He always used to do that. He said, "I love you, pal." He said, "We're going to knock him dead, Tommy." And all of a sudden, it hit me. Oh my God, I'm in Frank Sinatra's private jet flying into my hometown where my name is going to be on the marquee with Frank Sinatra. I got so choked up. Frank kept talking, thank God. I couldn't talk. I got so choked up. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I hope I didn't have to say anything, because I was so choked up that my mind flashed back on that little boy shining shoes in those bars, hearing Frank Sinatra in the jukebox. And now I'm going back to that place where my name's going to be on my key. That was a moment. I never had that moment again like that. And I don't know why I had it that night, but it just caught me at that moment. It was a surreal moment.
Yeah, I would think. Now, another one, probably, not as big, but in the book, you talk about how you wanted to play Little League ball, but weren't able to. And as a Cub fan, you wound up getting a chance to be the bat boy.
Yeah. And
how did that come about?
Oh, I couldn't play Little League ball. I could have. I made the team, but you had to have money for. They supplied the uniforms and everything, but you had money like for spikes and I think there's some kind of insurance thing. When I realized that, I went to Shining Shoes, back to Shining Shoes with my brother. I do that in my one man play. Sometimes I do a monologue from that night of what happened. But the what was the second question? The second question was, I'm sorry,
about what it was like when you would to go from being a Cub fan growing up.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, how
to
that?
be able to play Little League, and then all of a sudden here you are in Wrigley Field.
Yeah, you know what? Jim Fry, who was managing the Cubs back in the '80s, I was having brunch with him one time. He said, "How long have you been a Cub fan?" I said, "Oh, when I was a little boy, my brother and I would shine these shoes, and we'd bring the money home to my mom. She'd put one nickel out of it into a cup up in the cupboard, a cracked cup, an old cup. And when it got filled, she would let Glenn and I take it to the IC, my older brother and I, IC down to Chicago to Randolph Street, taking the L over to Wrigley Field, and we'd sit in the bleachers." And I was telling him that. And I said, and that's when I was a little kid. I said, and I would see the bat boy down there, and I'd say, "Wow." I told my brother, "Wow, wouldn't it be great if we'd be a bat boy?" He said, "They don't let kids from us from the south side. They let these rich kids from the north side be bat boys." And Jim Fry said, "Well, maybe we'll let your childhood dream come true." And he lets me be bat boy at Wrigley Field 4 years in a row. I was going to Chicago, and for 1 week when they had a week engagement there, and they let me be bat boy, and I'd appear at Zany's comedy club downtown, and the players, because they only played day games in those times in Chicago, the Cubs did, and so the players and their wives would come to my shows. Rick Sutcliffe and his wife Robin, Greg Maddox and his wife, and Jim Moyer and his what's his name? Yeah, the other pitcher, Moyer. Anyhow, Greg Maddox and Moyer, and I'm trying to think of all the other guys, Jody Davis, and they would come to my shows, and then next day I'd get there early, and they'd let me hit batting practice and run around the outfield and catch fly balls. I was like a pig in slop. It was great.
What was it like doing batting practice?
Oh, it was so much fun. And what happened, meanwhile, later on, when Harry Carey had the stroke, they let me announce the games. So I announced a couple games. That was fun too. But when batting practice, a guy was going to pitch to me, was the assistant general manager. And because the Chicago Tribune was doing a story on me, and they said, "Can we take some pictures while you're taking batting practice?" I said, "Sure." And so the guy's name was John Cox, and he was going to throw me some nice pitches. And Rick Sutcliffe said to me, "Tommy, let me throw to you." I said, "Oh, Rick, I would, but John's going to groove some in there so I can get around on him." I played fast pitch softball when I was in a fast pitch league till I was 58 years old out here in California. So I played ball, but not that level at all. So I said John was going to put some in there so I could get around on him. Rick said, "I'll do that." So Rick started just throwing some nice pitches in there, and I hit a ground ball, I swung and missed, hit a ground ball. Then I hit one pretty deep out the center field where it bounced in the grass, went about 4 or 5 bounces, and went up against the wall. And the next day, the Chicago Tribune said I hit one off the wall, which I didn't. I did.
But you're going to take it.
Yeah, it rolled out there. So now when I do that, my big mouth, I said, "Hey, Rick, I'm going to have some fun," because he always busts my chops. I said, "Hey, Rick, if I hit off of you, I'd be in the Hall of Fame." And I never saw another pitch after that. He threw me the nastiest curveball, breaking ball. He threw some stuff at me. I was swinging from the rafters. Uh,
That's funny. Who was the biggest character when you were, hanging out in the dugout during games? Who was the biggest character?
no doubt about it, Sutcliffe. When Sutcliffe pitched, you could not talk to him that day. He came focused. He didn't talk to anybody. He was really, just heads on in the game. Didn't sit by himself. But when he wasn't pitching, he was always doing stunts. He would do such things with me. There was a styrofoam. He would get a styrofoam cup and he'd fill it with red Kool-Aid. But he'd poke a hole in it first, and he'd put a Kool-Aid and he'd keep his finger over the hole. And then he'd come talking to me, "Hey, Tommy." Now all of a sudden you go, "Oh, I don't believe that. Hey, Tommy, hold this for me." And what I didn't know, he had the WGN camera on me, focused on me, and I'd hold this styrofoam cup while all the Kool-Aid went all over my uniform. Another time he said, "Come sit by me." I didn't realize they put black tar down on the bench, and I sat in the tar. And he said, "Hey, Nipper," one of the pitchers for the Cubs, he said, "Nipper needs a towel out there." And so he said, and of course Jim Fry was in on it, and he said, "Run out there and bring him towel." So I run out there and I got all that black all over my rear end. Of course, they had the camera watching that, Another time, how he did it, I had to wear a hard hat to get in the bats. And he somehow blew a bubble and stuck it on the back of my hat, and the bubble was way up high. So he said, "Hey, Mark Grace left the bat out there, run out there." And so I run out there and I got this bubble on my head, and everybody in the stands are looking at me and poking and laughing. Of course, I think they're laughing because I'm a comedian. I'm waving at them with this goop bubble on my head.
Oh, that's funny.
I still sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" every year. Me and Joe Mantegna hold the record. We've done it 18 years in a row ever since Harry died. So Joe and I, every year he does it, and I'll do it. I think I'll be doing it in September this year.
All right. Well, I mentioned Joe. You and Joe do a lot of work with the Gary Sinise Foundation, don't you?
Yeah, I'm an ambassador to the Gary Sinise Foundation. Gary, his foundation, what we do, we build smart homes for our veterans who lose their limbs in combat. And we built about 78 smart homes already. And so we go around the country, do shows, raise money, and I'm an ambassador to help raise money for that foundation. And Gary's a Chicago guy, Joe Mantegna is a Chicago guy. We used to hang out. Oh God, we had such good times. Gary Sinise, Dennis Franz, Dennis Farina, God rest his soul, Peterson, Jim Peterson. Who else? Mantegna, but just Chicago guys hanging around. Joe had a place out there called Taste Chicago, so we'd sit around eating beef sandwiches and just telling Chicago stories.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I've always felt Chicago actors are not like, and Chicago entertainers are not like New York or LA. When we were sitting at that table, all of us guys, if somebody would have come up and said to Dennis Franz, "Gee, I love you on NYPD Blue," some couple would interrupt our lunch to say that. He would say, "Oh," he'd stand up and he'd say, "Thank you so much. What is your name, Edna and Art? Oh, this is my friend Tom Dreesen. This is my friend Joe Mantegna and Dennis Farina." And we would all, because we're Chicago guys. We weren't New York actors who say, "Can't you see I'm eating? My God, if a man can't have a meal without being interrupted." Those are the kind of people I want to throw through a window. The LA actors, somewhere somebody says, if you're going to become a star, you have to act like a star. Act like you're tortured and, oh my God, you can't have a moment without your fans bothering you. There's such prima donnas. I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia, but I got a doctorate from the streets. So I gravitate to people like that. My friends in Hollywood, I never had Hollywood friends. Frank's group was a totally different group, Frank Sinatra's. They were big stars, Gregory Peck and Kirk Douglas Jack Lemmon, and these are all the people that Clint Eastwood, and that's how I met Clint, and we became friends. Frank introduced me to him, but they were so secure in their own skin that they were more interested in you. They'd say, "Oh, tell me about stand-up comedy. What made you ever want to do that?" I want to say, when I was a little kid watching you in To Kill a Mockingbird in the Harvey Theater, you know. But so when I came out here, the celebrities that I became friends with were neighborhood guys like me. Frankie Avalon came from South Philly. James Darren from South Philly. Bobby Rydell, South Philly. I gravitated in. We became friends. Dennis Farina from Chicago, from my neighborhood. Joe Pesci from Newark, from a neighborhood. Frankie Valli from a neighborhood in Newark. That's who we hung out together. We had a group out here we affectionately called the IMO, Italian Men Only. It was all those guys I just mentioned, Joe Montaigne and all the guys that I just mentioned. And we made Smokey Robinson an honorary Sicilian. So we would get together once a month and go to a restaurant and just hang out, and like we did back in the old neighborhood. That's the kind of people I like in show business.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, in the book, you mentioned about being at Frank's home, and the folks are there. Tell me this: the first time you're there, and all these people come in, what's going through your mind?
Well, the first time I toured with Frank about 6 months, and he invited me to his home. Now, again, I grew up in a shack. Now I'm thinking, well, home. I go down there; it's a compound, and when you pull up in the security gate, they have cameras and everything. Their gate opens up, security guard lets you in, and then they show you where to park and everything. And then you go to it's a beautiful. Frank has a huge home at the compound, or did have one. He got swimming pools and tennis courts, and he also has one big area, a room like a little small house that has all of his electric trains. He had over $2 million worth of electric trains, and they were all along the wall and brackets within every train that was ever made. And then in the center was a big table that was East Coast and West Coast, and the trains would go from East Coast to West Coast, and Frank would operate them. He put an engineer's hat on, woo woo, and he'd be operating trains. And then he had a caboose on his lot that had a barber's chair and had a massage room. Then they had bungalows all along the outer perimeter that were named after his songs. New York, New York, tend to trap strangers in a night my way, and then all the house guests stayed in that, and the house guests were like Gregory Peck and his wife Veronique, Jack Lemmon and his wife Felicia, Kirk Douglas, his wife Ann, Clint Eastwood and whoever he's dating at that time, and Angie Dickinson, and just, Isaac Stern and Admiral Shepard, the first man in space. Just interesting people. And the first night I go there, they had a cocktail party, and I'm standing in a corner looking. I said, "Oh my God, these are people that I saw in the movies back in Harvey, Illinois." And they were just so wonderful. So wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely got to be one of those pinch me moments.
Yeah, I've had so many of those in my whole life. I really have. And they treated me like a peer. They didn't treat me like a newcomer or anything that, they included me in all their conversations, and we became best of friends. Peck and I would go to dinner at a place called Mateo's, him and his wife, Veronique. We played poker every Sunday at Frank's house for 25 years. Played every Sunday was poker. Frank never played, but it would be all those people I mentioned and their wives, plus Larry Gelbart. He wrote MASH, and he also wrote the movie Tootsie, and one of the great comedy writers of all time. Dom DeLuise and his wife Carol, Robert Wagner, Joe St. John. All these people, we play poker on Sundays for about 4 hours, and then we'd break and have lunch, dinner, and then we'd play for another hour or two. So that was always a joy, doing that too.
Yeah, that's some great stories, Tom.
Well, all of this is why I wrote the book. If I close my eyes, no matter where I'm at, opening for Frank Sinatra on any of those shows at the White House, I performed for presidents. If I close my eyes, I see a little boy with a shoe shine box, 10 years old, trudging through the snow in Harvey, Illinois, going from bar to bar, trying to make money to feed his brothers and sisters. I'm only a heartbeat away from that boy. So I wrote the book, Still Standing, and the subtitle is My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. I wrote it to encourage others who may have come from the same kind of similar poor background or never thought their dream would come true. I wrote it for that reason. At the end of your life, like I said earlier, all you have are memories. So make some good ones.
Absolutely. Well, Tom, that sounds like a perfect note to wrap this episode of the show up on.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I wish your daddy was here alive to hear this interview.
Yeah, he would have been so thrilled to watch you and I talking. So
Yeah, I think that would mean, yeah, I think they would have got a kick out of that for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, on that note, we're going to wrap this one up. Tom, I want to thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Michael. I was happy to do this, and hopefully the next time if I ever come in the area, we'll do this in the studio. That'd be fun.
That would be perfect.
You never said
So
anything about my piano. How do you like my piano?
that's the one you wrote all those songs for Frank on, isn't it?
Right there on that piano.
All right, everybody. I'll tell you what, I want to thank you for watching. Again, Tom, thank you for being here. Everybody, have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.